We now technically have another 15 minutes, 1-5 of Q&A across all of the sessions, all of the sections. I've also prepared as a summary for our summary session later a quick page that I can share here on my screen if you give me a minute to try and pull it up here. But also looking forward to any further more overarching questions that anybody may have. And this again can be questions that are directly related to one of the presentations, that cut across all of the presentations, that are a bit off topic and simply are related to the overall session topic. Completely up to you, whatever else is on your mind. And in the meantime, let me pull up my screen here. So, quick view of Tuscany, and now you should see PowerPoint. So forgive me if the page isn't pretty. I've exited the business of doing PowerPoint pages myself quite a while back. But what I've tried to do here is basically summarize a bit what we've seen, and I've tried to basically summarize each of the different presentations in one bullet point. I've started with my own, not because I think, but simply because it was first, not any other reason for that. So a couple of thoughts, right? So I think COVID-19 will accelerate the transition towards less car-centric, more sustainable mobility landscape. At least that's what our data sees. We've seen that if you actually do detailed demand modeling based on smart card, travel cards, or other type of travel cards, you can significantly improve the prediction of demand in public transit systems and therefore enable social distancing to a certain extent, right? So you can actually make it possible to really steer demand and therefore make public transit, quote unquote, less frightful. We've seen the presentation from Anna on traffic patterns. I like the quote that the world stopped driving depending on when the lockdown happened, and that the congestion levels are still significantly below pre-COVID level. There were a couple of outliers there that I found odd, and I wanted to ask a couple of questions about some cities in Eastern Europe and Northern Europe, but I held off. And then in the end, I think what I took away from Anna is it's too early to tell if this will be sort of the end of traditional working hours and if the new normal or next normal, however you want to call it, will actually look different to the pre-COVID times. I hope, at least if I take a look at my daily commute, and yes, I'm commuting again almost every day to a location, and I'm in my office today in downtown Frankfurt. I do hope that the congestion is going to stay the way it is at the moment, or even get better again, because I think everything we had prior to COVID was not sustainable. And then last but not least, Eric, and I took the data point, I think a bit liberally, of 40 to 50% reduction in public transit trips, but largely driven by fewer travelers rather than fewer trips per traveler. And then we saw that there is a difference in patterns across regions and also demography. And I took your quote of sort of impoverished areas, which have the highest likelihood to stop traveling. And this is just 4 takeaways I took as a summary from our presentation. I could obviously have, or from all the different presentations, I could obviously have written down much more based on all the great materials that especially you guys have shared, and thanks again for that. But happy to take any further questions from the group on, again, specific presentations, topics that cut across, things that are related but maybe a bit off topic. Open to any kind of questions that the audience may still have.
We have one question over here, but it seems that it's the same one that we have on the Zoom call. Yes. It says, are there numbers of infections coming from PT? There is not much evidence people get infected on PT. Can we change the perception? Can we change perception? I believe that's for Eric.
I would have actually asked for a volunteer, but I think Eric is the most natural person to answer. I mean, I think we're all not sort of experts on COVID per se, right? And we're not virologists or whatever you need to be able to make a statement there. Maybe a politician or so. But Eric, if you feel comfortable, go ahead. If not, we'll find somebody else, or I'll try. But I know it's a difficult question.
I can start, and you are very happy to fill in.
Awesome, thank you.
I haven't seen any confident numbers about the infections from public transport. I think it's still quite debated whether public transport is an important driver of the transmission or not, and maybe most evidence is that it's not, but rather that it's the activities that people travel to that are the drivers. Still, the conditions can be very different in public transport, depending on if you are standing in a very crowded bus or for a long time, or in a not so crowded bus or train for a short time. So I think that the conditions can vary also within public transport. So it depends a bit, and maybe it's really where we can at least change perception is in these parts of public transport where we don't have problems with crowding. That there, I think it's likely that we're very low risks there.
Thanks, Eric. I'll pile on just with two quick comments. So I also haven't seen any evidence there either. But that's more me following the news on how the virus is spreading in especially Germany, because I mean that's in the end where I read most, or read and understand most of the news. I think there might be a question whether this changes in winter when public transit might get more crowded. Let's see how that goes. So basically, when everybody who still is commuting and is moving and has resorted to biking or different modes of transit so far will resort back to public transit because of weather or other reasons. I think there's one other point: perception is reality, right? And if I take a look, and if you think back to the one slide that I shared earlier on risk of infection being the premier reason why not, or why to select a certain mode of transit, and that there is a perception that risk of infection is actually fairly high in shared vehicles, or or let me take the shared vehicle example here. I think we need to change the perception. I agree. I think that's going to be a question of, again, politicians, virologists, other folks making clear statements on how actually being in contact with certain surfaces can or cannot transfer COVID. Because again, a car sharing vehicle where you're not close to any person, it's just the uncertainty of not knowing who's been in that vehicle before. But still, it's on the same level or even below when it comes below public transit when it comes to perceived safety of using it or perceived risk of infection, right? So I think it's very difficult. I mean, I know there are some efforts ongoing on sort of making cleaner surfaces and so on, but I think before we actually have that at scale in any kind of public transit mode or any kind of other type of vehicle, it's just going to take quite long. So yes, you can install a screen in a taxi quite quickly. That works, but until you've actually changed the entire seat surface or the surfaces, anything else you touch, regardless of whether that's a car or a bus or so, that might take a while. And sorry, one last point. So the planes I've been on ever since the epidemic, many of them have been entirely full. And for some reason, people don't seem to worry about being on a plane, but they seem to be worried about being on a bus. Not really sure why. But that's probably the same reason why folks don't complain about sharing a plane with 200 folks sitting in it like canned goods, whereas they do complain about sharing a vehicle with 3 other folks where actually the space is much more comfortable than in any kind of airliner, especially when you think about the way how the cheaper airliners package their passengers into the plane. But that's just human psychology, I guess. So I try to answer the follow-up question on any ideas to make it safer as well in this. Any other questions we get from the audience in the question tool? Because in the chat function, I think there is none.
We have no more questions here either.
Okay, then 30 more seconds, last chance to basically answer, or sorry, ask another question. I'll stop sharing my screen in the meantime. if there are none, let me take the opportunity to again thank everybody who's been involved here, especially the speakers. Eric, thanks a ton. Anna, thanks a ton. Niklas, thanks for doing that. Very much looking forward to discussing with you, hopefully sometime even in person, maybe next year, the year after. Let's see how that goes. Thanks to the participants. Thanks for the active participation and asking questions. Sorry I couldn't be with you in person. I would have much preferred that, but the requirement to actually get a Corona test after the trip would have limited the rest of my week quite significantly. So therefore, apologies for not being there in person. Again, very much looking forward to hopefully seeing many of you either virtually over the next couple of months or even in person, more likely next year than this year, I'm assuming. I think we're all going to the auditorium again for the summary session and looking forward to hearing a couple of you also in that session. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day. And Anna, thanks for coming back on screen. Thank you very much for joining us here, and then have a great day and a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.